All right. Hello, everyone. Hi. I'm John Murrock. I'm a professor in the econ department, and I am the director of what we affectionately call the Center for Teaching and Learning. And in plain terms, what that is that's a place where all the faculty go to kind of talk about pedagogy and think about ways that we want to kind of work in the classroom. Before I have the panel kind of introduce themselves, I thought I'd say one little thing, which is my daughter is a sophomore, and so I've started thinking in high school, and I've started thinking that in 3 years' time, I'm scared to death that I'm going to be on that side with all of you. And as I think about it now, I get emotional, so I don't know how the hell all of you are keeping it together. So well done. You're doing great. Keep it up. And so with that, I'm going to ask the panel to kind of introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, my name is Kara Becker and I'm a professor in the linguistics department.
Hi, my name is Fatima Mustaq. I teach political economy. I'm in the political science department.
Hi, welcome. My name is Kate Duffley. I teach in the theater department.
So kind of the way this is going to work is that this is primarily a session for you to ask questions about kind of life in the classroom. A couple of things that as we get started. Try not to make it all about your child. I'm sure this is getting recorded for parents who couldn't be here. I'm sure your child would love to not have their name be mentioned. So instead, kind of try to make it more general as you can. But what we're going to do is we'll have a couple of runners running around. If you have a question that you want to ask, kind of raise your hand and fire, and we'll go. I've got one question to kind of get us started and kind of get us warmed up. And then kind of in the Reed tradition, the rest is yours. So we can talk just because we can talk, but that's not good. You want to know stuff. So by all means, make sure you let us know what it is, and we'll go from there. So kind of the first thing we kind of just thought about in terms of thinking about this is kind of asking the panel, what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities for this upcoming semester, and what will you be doing to foster inclusive, rigorous intellectual engagement in your classes? So we'll start with there and go forward. Like I say, my job is to moderate, and I'll let them chime in when whoever wants to go first.
Sure, I'll go first. Challenges and opportunities. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm sure that you all have lots of questions about what your students are going to be doing in their classes. When I'm thinking about we're also ramping up for the semester, and I'm getting ready to teach my classes. I'm thinking a lot about what is the kind of classroom space that I'm going to create for the students and with the students. I'm always looking to create an inclusive environment, one that is taking into account lots of different learning styles, and also lots of different educational backgrounds. So I teach in the theater department, as I said. I teach some studio-based classes. I teach some classes that are more reading and writing based. And students are coming from, some of them have done a lot of theater, some of them have not done any. Also, some of the classes that I teach are really interdisciplinary, so what they think they might be getting when they're coming into a theater class might be really different from what they're getting. So I'm wanting to kind of learn from them about what are they bringing to the class, what do they think they know about what I'll be teaching, and how they're going to be approaching it. And I guess the other thing that I would start off by saying is of late I've been really interested in thinking a lot about embodied pedagogy. So it makes sense. I teach performance classes. We're moving around a lot, but I also think about that in more reading and writing based classes, right? That students are coming with their whole bodies. They're not just brains on sticks. So how can I be engaging their whole bodies in both maybe a more movement-based class, but also a reading and writing-based class. So we do some mindfulness, we do some grounding stuff, we probably get up and move at least once each time we meet. And so those just are some of the ways in which I'm kind of trying to wake us up to the material and to kind of get us out of the kind of low, relaxed mode so that we're really awake to learning things that might be very new to them.
Yeah, kind of adding on to what Kate just said. So I don't know if you know, but we do have a Center for Teaching and Learning at Reed. And one of the things that I learned last year, attending one of the workshops there, was that students learn best when they feel comfortable and safe in the classroom, right? And this is why some students don't like to do math, because they get scared, right? And so what you just said, Kate, like making the space, making students feel secure and safe in that space to either dissent or express themselves, right, is really important. And so one thing that I've kind of been struggling with or thinking about very deeply is when students see the syllabus, they need to have the confidence, right, to think that they actually can succeed in this classroom, right, in this course. And so one area where I know that I kind of need to really be mindful is in the amount of readings that we assign students, right? We know that, most students are taking 4 classes. And so if you assign, say, 150 pages per week, right, per class, that's a lot, right? And so one thing that I'm doing with my syllabi this semester is really putting markers in for students, right, guiding questions, like this is what you need to be thinking about, big picture questions, right? And also introducing different types of reading, right, faster reading, slower reading, right, how to read, right, at read. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about as the semester approaches.
I have an answer. I saw there was already maybe a question, and I'm happy to wait if you wanted to ask your question.
I mean, I guess I can go to that a little bit. So in economics, one of the things I saw from students was getting them back used to taking exams in class again. That didn't happen during the pandemic. So it was a skill that didn't get developed in the same way that it would have, say before. I don't think that's as much of it's gotten less and less of an issue as we've gone on. But the first year or two, I remember I had a student come to me and say, and this is the first in-person time test I've taken in 3 years. And I was like, oh, okay, so now we need to think about this. So now one of the things I do is I sit there and say, okay, how do we actually study for in-class tests? How do you actually think about doing these sort of things? And as a result, I've also kind of changed my thought process a little bit in terms of how I structured the exam to be like, okay, students are used to open book, open notes. I do everything, free time. So I'm like, okay, I've got to meet them in the middle. And so now I've worked that way in terms of like, okay, we have comfort sheets that you can bring into the exam now and other sorts of things. So it's a slow adjustment on both sides that we've definitely seen that. So that would be one place that I've noticed.
Sure. I can offer some thoughts. I think that post-pandemic, maybe seeing some changes to students' kind of academic toolkit. And that shows up in it's going to be in different ways in our different disciplines and the kind of thing. So I don't give exams, for example, but work that's based on doing reading, research, and write-ups. And so kind of to connect it back to the question about inclusivity, I think something that feels really important is including or empowering students to engage with you around what they know how to do. Like Fatima was saying, building their confidence, but not just sort of me saying to them, here's what I expect of you, or here's what you need to read, or here's a skill I want you to learn, but involving them in those things, right? Saying to them, these are things I'm hoping that you'll be able to do by the end of the semester or that I want for you. And it could be something like a pretty simple skill, like, how do I critically read a text and ask a good question about it? To my peers, during class. That could be something that, you need to work on, right? And it can be really wonderful to involve students in that as opposed to me going, hey, here are some ideas about how you can read a text and ask a critical question, but what do you think, right? How might we have a difficult conversation in class about something that's a little bit tricky? And so involving and empowering students to kind of really engage in their own learning for learning's sake, as opposed to sort of just saying to them, here's a product that I want you to achieve or a thing I want you to know how to do. I think that can really go a long way towards, getting that really important buy-in from them. And also, again, that's ultimately the goal, right, which is that they're here because they're excited, they're curious, they want to get something out of a class that I'm offering. So that can be really enjoyable. Hopefully that spoke to your question a little bit, yeah.
Can I build off that a little bit? I think this is maybe something I got from you, Kara. I don't know. But thinking about your question, I'm thinking, I guess I've noticed students coming out of the pandemic a little bit more leaned out, as we might imagine, the result of being in a lot of Zoom classrooms. And so asking students at the beginning of the semester, and maybe again mid-semester, and maybe checking back in on this at the end of the semester, what are your goals for the semester? So I laid out what my goals are, what my learning goals are for the course at the beginning of the semester. But I'm really interested in hearing from them, and I want them to spend some time thinking about what are your goals going into this class? And I'm often really surprised by what they are. They might be really different than what my goals are for them, and that's totally okay. Like I still am gonna pursue my learning goals, and we're gonna pursue those together. And usually I find students are pretty on board with that as well. But they also have a set of goals, and just giving the space to invite them to think about it for themselves, so that they're more empowered to really be taking on that learning. Has been really successful.
We have mics running over for the back of the room, so come. Yeah. That way you don't have to scream.
My question is this. From your perspective, I'm curious to hear the benefits of a liberal arts education, both benefits and costs relative to a traditional, let's say, state university. What you feel like you can give them in the classroom versus what they maybe can't get at those larger universities, and vice versa. And I'll preface it with a caveat that I am a university professor, so I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Well, I will preface this answer by saying I've done both. And so I chose to be here for a reason. I had tenure at a large state university and gave it away to come here without tenure. And for me, the most important thing that I am able to give students, and I think is the biggest benefit, is that I have an actual relationship with the students in a way that is very hard to generate in a state school. It's just not part of the culture of a lot of places. And so when I was at my state university, I had come from a liberal arts school, went to the state university, and then came back to liberal arts. So I'm kind of a weird unicorn in the academic world, so to speak. But the one thing my faculty at the state school kept telling me over and over again is, why are you creating Liberal Arts School South? Why are you doing this? Why are you meeting with students? Why are you talking with them? You shouldn't be focusing. I got all these sort of weird messages coming back, and I was like, well, the whole reason I'm in this business is to talk with the students and to watch them kind of bloom and grow. That's the whole point. They're like, no. And I'm like, okay, and hence why I'm here. So I think one of the benefits that you're getting is that you're getting faculty who are really committed to the student and to the learning and to the journey. This is something where I have students in one class, and then 3 years later they walk and go, hey, John, how are you doing? I'm like, oh, good. How are you? And we just continue on. But 3 years have passed, and we know each other still. Right? It's a relationship that's very different than what you're going to get in any sort of in a state school. And I tried my best at the state schools to create these sort of things. And the other things is the students weren't open to it. They're like, what is this? This is because I was such an outlier, at least in my institution. I was such the outlier in terms of trying to build these relationships that they didn't know what to do with it. That they were so utterly befuddled by it. And so as a result, I find it thrives a lot more here. And I have really good relationships. I mean, I've had students graduate, international students graduate, live in my house afterwards while they were trying to find a job. I mean, that's the sort of relationships that you have the potential to build. And I just went to his country to go watch his wedding. It's that sort of thing that you have that potential to build here. Now, I'm not saying that your student is going to have that with every faculty member or may even have that with any faculty member. But the opportunity is there. And if the stars align right, you could get there.
Nobody's lived in my house so far, so it could be a little bit different, but I'll speak to the relationship or say something about a benefit, and I have a cost too. The benefit for me about this relationship that John's mentioning, I would characterize it as kind of a leveling of the playing field. So something that really struck me when I came here from a really different type of school. We sit at a table together. I don't stand very much. I don't lecture very much. I sit with my students. They call me by my first name. I call them by their first names. I know all of their names. And so there's a way that we interact that I think is really special, that's relevant to the liberal arts and maybe even very specific to Reed, so this conference method that we have. I just remember thinking, as I started to be the teacher on that side, like, why didn't anybody tell me that this was a way that you could do it? You know, because I went down a very different path, and it's incredible. It can be really incredible. So that relationship that you can build in the classroom is really special. Now, one of the costs of that is actually time. It's really time-consuming to build these relationships. I think we're all kind of happy to do that, but it's a very different model. So another example I would bring up is if I have a research write-up that's due in my class, and I get, 24 of them or 10 of them, whatever it might be, however many students. What's so interesting is it takes time for all the students, even the ones who are doing excellent work. So at a school that I used to go to, if I did a great research write-up, somebody could put an A at the top and hand it back to me, and that would be about all the feedback that I got. And what I do is I read that research write-up and I write a letter to the student that says, like, hey, this was really excellent. Here's what I really liked about it. Here's some things it made me think of. Here's some things you might actually do next time to challenge yourself, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll do that for a really strong project, and I'll do that for one that is a bit weaker. And so those are the kinds of things that, it's like, they're costs, but they're also quite amazing because we're able to then develop this academic relationship with our students over the course of a semester and beyond that I think, is again really special and something I wish I had when I was a student myself.
Mike's coming.
Question about attention spans. I know the incoming freshmen, and probably for the last few years, the kids coming in have grown up with cell phones. And I'm wondering if you've seen that reflected in their attention spans, their ability to get through a lot of reading in a short period of time. And have you made any accommodations for that, or how do you work with them to get them reading at a speed, I guess, that they should be reading at, or a level of depth, maybe?
I don't know why you're looking at me. I don't know that I have an answer for that. Yes.
I can answer it.
Okay, great.
You want to think? Yeah.
You go first.
Well, I mean, I
and
have
then
some
maybe
thoughts, and then you can think.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us have noticed that, and I would connect it to some things that have already come up. It's sort of like it becomes a little bit more of our job then to take on helping students make that transition, kind of preparing them, maybe working them up towards a heavier reading load, for example. In my own experience, I've been teaching here for, 13 years or so. I would say I assign a little less reading every year. And what I do is I talk to my students about building that skill. And what I actually want for them, it's not about the number of pages, right? It's about what they're getting out of the text. So I'm actually very happy to give them a little less if it can encourage them to sort of get over that anxiety of, I have so much to read. And we can talk about and have a conversation about, how do I encounter this text? And there's so many different skills that you can work with them to develop to kind of build up to, again, not the pages, but sort of like, what is the goal of this and what am I trying to get out of it? So I think that that's a piece. The part about cell phones and devices, my approach has just sort of been to, again, have a conversation with my students and offer them some respect and just say, hey, I understand this is sort of what's going on, and I know these things are really distracting. In my classes, they need their laptops, really, to read PDFs and do other things. And so I just ask them to be respectful and try their best, right, and to acknowledge, right, that there are a lot of distractions in our environment, and to say, like, you're here because we have 80 minutes together on Tuesdays and 80 minutes on Thursdays, and, like, let's make the most of that time. And I think actually that works really well because, they're capable of a lot. And again, if they kind of understand what your goals are and those things happen to align with some of their goals because they're here, right, and they're wanting to take these classes, I think that can go a long way. That being said, it is a challenge.
Yeah, I wanted to just build on that. Yes, it is a challenge, and maybe I'm just reiterating some of what Kara said, but I think the thing that I most want to build with my students is stamina for continuing with something that is difficult. So in my class, they might receive a reading that is really challenging, and so rather than just chucking it when it becomes like, I cannot parse this. What do we do when we are confronted with something that is difficult to understand? And so it's a little bit of that attention span thing, but it also is like sticking with something that is difficult. And sometimes we will spend time in class right? I will notice, okay, nobody has done this reading today, or you really skimmed it, and this was a challenging reading, so I am happy to spend time in class, and rather than worry about page numbers, let's take this paragraph. It's really challenging. What happens when we are confronted with this really challenging thing? And I'd rather take the time to do that with them and have that be a skill that they're building, where they can stick with something just a little bit longer when it really feels hard. And Pete Rock, I don't know if you were there for convocation this morning. Pete Rock's great talk about beginnings, and this really resonated with me, this idea of this moment where you've left the shore and you can't yet see the other shore, and that is such a moment of chaos that I'm sure many of us have experienced as well. And so just to recognize that is something that I know, I experienced that as well. And so let's build up this. You can build up this skill. Yeah.
If I can just add a few things. So when I first came here, I was really wedded to the idea of students doing 3 papers for a course, right? But now, kind of going back to the attention span and how to read, I find myself assigning, in addition to papers, written work, short assignments, like, for example, weekly memos, right? To ensure that they're keeping up with the readings. So in these low-stakes assignments that are weekly, they kind of put down their thoughts. It might be in the form of a research journal or like in a blog, right, where they get to interact with other students. So that's one way of ensuring that at least they're looking at the readings, if not reading them, and coming up with, say, a discussion question or a concept report, right, which can then be used in the classroom, right? And so when I call on them to talk about a concept or, about the question that they asked, they're kind of held accountable, right? And so I think those kinds of interventions, which again, as Kara said, is more work for us because we have to keep up with, what they're writing and responding to that. But I think that is a way of kind of countering, right, the attention span problem and all of that. But I find that to be really effective in most cases.
Hi, I'm wondering if y'all could talk a bit about how you work with students who were homeschooled. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I terrify you?
No. We don't know if they are or not. In some ways, they would have to self-identify that was a thing for them. I've discovered after class that somebody was homeschooled, but they never brought it up in class. We never asked, and I've never noticed anything out of the norm for them when I've had that experience in the past. So I think that's why I'm kind of that's why you're getting this weird look from me. I mean, I haven't noticed anything unusual or different. They seem to be able to slide right in. The few that I've experienced, I don't know. Does that seem right?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add to that is kind of back to my earlier comment where I know that in any class that I'm teaching, there will be students who have lots of different ways of learning and have lots of different educational backgrounds. So I'm always thinking about constructing my class in a way that is going to bring in as many of those students as possible. So there's lots of different ways into the material, lots of different kinds of assignments. It's my assumption that everybody is going to have different educational backgrounds and different ways of learning. Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier, and I know Reed emphasizes deep feedback on assignments, and I think one of you even mentioned writing a letter to your students. I know a lot of professionals don't do a great job of accepting that type of rigorous feedback and deep feedback, especially when it is critical. So is that a skill that you teach? How do you prep these 18-year-olds who are high achieving, probably haven't gotten a whole lot of critical feedback, and now all of a sudden they're going to be in, getting things back that might be pretty tough?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is similar to things I've said before about developing that relationship and being able to talk about it. So I'm just reflecting back there, in an intro course, the first time I do that letter to everyone, then I'll send it out the night before. The next morning in class, I'm going to say something about, hey, I sent my first round of feedback back. Here are some tips about how to read it. I want you to know I give everybody a lot of feedback. It could be excellent. There might be challenges, right? And so I just try to kind of address it, and I think those ongoing conversations can be helpful. Getting students to come into office hours and having one-on-one conversations, we work on doing that in a range of ways, right? You might incorporate it as an assignment or part of a participation grade. You might just encourage and make yourself welcoming, but those are great opportunities, I think, to talk with students who might find it challenging to get feedback that's different. The thing I was actually going to say when you asked your question is much more common for me is it's actually a strange thing to get qualitative feedback if you're not used to it. And so a lot of students, I think, come in expecting to get a grade or a check plus or something they know what it means. And if I write like, hey, John, thanks so much for your research project. Here's some things I thought about it. Often that's very confusing, right? They're like, well, what does this mean? Did I do well? Did I not do well? So that's another thing to have a conversation about and kind of set expectations around is like, what am I actually communicating? Because it can be a little bit hard to tell when you're actually making an effort, right? Not to just say A or whatever it is. And then the last thing I was going to say is I think a good amount of us on campus, moving more towards the direction of self-assessment. So adding that component in, right, where it's not just me sort of reading what you've done or whatever, grading your problem set or your test and saying, here's what it is from an external perspective. But I think as Kate was saying, what are your goals for you? What are you working on? How do you think you did on this assignment? How do you think you did in my class overall? And just experimenting with different ways to get students, again, involved in that process. I think that actually goes a long way towards tempering some of those tricky situations around kind of getting feedback and maybe the feedback's not wholly positive. Often when I do those things, I'm very pleasantly surprised that I actually don't have to communicate a lot to a student because they already know, right, some of the things that I might be wanting to pass along to them. They're often very aware of where they might want to improve. They're very aware of what they do really well. And so actually encouraging them to sort of bring those things out, then again, it becomes more of a dialogue and something we can work on together versus, I just gave you some feedback that can be hard to take in.
And I guess I would add from the quantitative side, so in terms of exams and that sort of stuff, I think one of the shocks that students have to deal with is that sometimes not everybody's getting 100 or that 100 is not possible. So I do a lot of kind of explaining what a curve means, and I don't mean it in the law school sense of like 30% gets this, 40% gets that, but more of a curve in the sense that, okay, I wrote this exam out of 80 points and the highest anybody possibly got was 62. Well, guess what, folks? It's not out of 80 anymore. It's out of 62 because that's the best that we could do. And so let's go from there and then teach them kind of what does it mean that you got a 50 out of an 80-point exam when it turns out the best was a 62, and kind of getting them to kind of reframe it from a percentage-based thing to a relative sort of thing. Because a lot of these sort of, as you get into the more of the quantitative spaces, we ask things that we think are, oh, well, they'll get that. And then they don't, and that's okay, that's on me, right? And so trying to have them also learn that occasionally on those sort of sides, oh, that exam didn't work, and here's why. And I've had examples where we had a question where everybody got it wrong, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about why this, what was the wording wrong? What did I do on this to confuse you on this? Here's what I was thinking about. And then they go, oh, okay. So I think those sort of combinations happen as well. So it's all of it's a teaching process from our end. We have to kind of bring them along to understand what we're doing, what our philosophy is under the different sorts of feedback that we're going to give them.
Our student said that because she won't know what her grades are, neither will her parents. And so she considered that a big advantage. But how do parents keep track of what's going on?
I mean, I believe we currently have a system where students have control over whether parents have access to their grades. And that's correct.
That's correct, yep.
So it could be up to the student to sort of invite their parents in from the beginning to that or not. There's an interesting philosophy about grades at Reed. We do have students still that go all 4 years without knowing their grades. If they're doing well, those grades don't get pushed out to them. And so there are many students that find that an empowering experience. And again, it kind of fits into this philosophy of like you're in the classroom to learn and maybe not to have this external measure. Grades that are low, or if a student is struggling, do get pushed out, right? So we have opportunities to engage with students in that way. But all of that kind of fits into, a wide range, I think, of how students interact with and experience those traditional letter grades, including how parents are involved in the process.
There's also a federal law called FERPA, FERPA, that really limits what we as faculty or we as staff or we as a community can actually communicate to you. So it is coming through your student. So this is a conversation for you and your student to say, okay, when are you going to tell me? How are you going to tell me? It's really between you and your student. We are really limited, so like you couldn't call us up and say, how's Johnny doing? We'd have to sit there and say, we can't tell you. We're sorry, but under FERPA, we're not allowed. And so that's a big component of a limitation in terms of the communication that you'll be able to get from us. It'll be pretty non-existent.
So I'm really curious about the conference method and also kind of what happens in the classroom. How much of it is lecture and collaborative and group project and individual papers and things like that? I'm sure every class is different, but I'm curious if there's kind of an overview that you can provide.
Okay, I haven't even had a chance to collect my thoughts, so bear with these scattered thoughts maybe. So the question is, what is our classroom? What do they look like? And you are totally right that all of our classes, every one of our classes up here, probably looks really different from each other. Yes to all of what you said. So there's, and I just want to say that as soon as you asked this question about the classroom, I felt myself get really excited. I'm really excited for classes to begin. I think that what happens in the classroom is my favorite thing about being here at Reed. It is so fun and invigorating to me to create a space with the students where we are learning together. I learn a lot from my students. So what do we do in the class? So I'm going to focus on maybe a conference-based class. Like I said, I also teach studio classes, and those look pretty different. But when I'm meeting with students in a classroom and we're sitting around the table, they'll have come often having done some readings for the day. I'll usually start with some kind of check-in. We'll go around the room. Everybody will say, maybe a check-in will be like, on a scale of 1 to 3, where are you today? And what's one word that says, like, that names just like, what are you bringing into the classroom today? So just a moment for us to arrive. I might have a check-in question that's related to the reading for the day, something that you connected with. And then we will, maybe we will launch with a question that the students have thought of or written down after having done the reading. I'll say, who wants to share their discussion question for the day? We'll start off with that discussion question, and that might launch our conversation for the day about the readings. As I mentioned earlier, I'm really interested in embodied pedagogy, so I will usually, over the course of one class, have us get up and move into a different configuration. So think pair share is a method that many of us use, right? So like, okay, here's the question. Think to yourself about it. Maybe write down. Okay, turn to your neighbor or get up and find another person in the room who you haven't talked to recently. Talk to them about that and then share out to the whole room. So always an opportunity to just kind of like reshuffle where you are in the space. That wakes our brains up to kind of new thinking. So I'll leave it there because I'm we've got many other like group assignments, blah, 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 but that's just like a little taste of what, a little bit of what my classroom looks like.
Again, going back to the question of confidence, one of the things I'm really focused on in my classroom is to build students' confidence, right, in the material, in themselves. And so there are a couple of things I do. I'm sure that you, Kara, and Kate, John, you all do this too. I have them lead discussion, so in pairs, right, in most of my classes, especially in the upper levels. In my intros, I'll lecture a little bit more. And in my upper level courses, in addition to leading discussion for the day, I also have students also in pairs do presentations on readings that all of them won't do. So I have a set of core readings, and then I have optional readings. So that's one way of ensuring that students don't have to read as much, but are able to get exposure, right, to the field. So these acts of like leading discussion, doing presentations, I think really kind of build their confidence in the material, have them be the expert for that day in the classroom. And I think that really brings people out of their shells and create a good kind of active learning community.
Yeah, I guess I would just add a couple more details to give you a sense. And I teach a pretty traditional conference, and as I understand it, the goal is for that time to be student-led. And I'll tell you, it was really hard for me to adjust to that. I taught at a lot of other places, and I lectured. And I got really good at that. I was happy to stand in the front of the room with all the bells and the whistles and my PowerPoint and my audio, because I teach about language, and I could talk forever. And the idea that I would go into class for 80 minutes and talk very little, that's still really challenging for me. And so I tell my students that. But that's actually our goal. At the same time, I have expertise and information that I want them to have, right? And so it's actually a really interesting challenge every day in class to figure out how to kind of find that balance, right? So there will be times where I'll say, and I think what really helps is also to kind of signpost to students or just to explain to them, you know, we have a certain amount of time together. We're going to do, I'm going to share some information with you for 15 minutes, right? And that maybe is more traditional lecture. There's something I want you to know. And then we're going to have you work together in groups and generate some thoughts and ideas or brainstorm, or we're going to do this, or we're going to, we again, listen and watch a lot of things, and we might do a critical analysis of a TikTok video, right? And we're going to do all sorts of different activities together. But the idea is to sort of shift that balance kind of away from me. So I've given them the structure, I've given them information, and then see what they can do with it. And that's how I understand the conference method, and it is an incredible experience. It's be really fun, like Kate said.
So I would say for my class, the conference is not, I'm more of a lecture conference sort of combo. And really what that means is it's interruptible lecture. I'm doing a lot of quantitative, heavy technical sort of work. And so the thing I want to make sure is that the students understand the mechanics. And so we just go through the mechanics, and the idea is that they have the responsibility to stop at any point and say, okay, do that again. What are you talking about? What is that? Why does that work? Why does that not work? And so it's never a situation where I just sit there with a PowerPoint and go. Mine is very much kind of, we're going to talk about this stuff today. Your job is to stop as soon as you do. And then one of the challenges, I would say, kind of from going back to the original question, kind of pandemic sort of stuff, is getting students comfortable asking questions. And so we have a symbol in my class, which is that you just do this. And if you do this enough with your pen, I now know that you have a question. And therefore, I know to stop and do it again. So we try to be creative in the ways that you try to encourage them to come in. But not every, you know, the conference lecture sort of balance is going to depend on the discipline a little bit too, in terms of how far can you push on the conference. On the intro-level econ stuff, it's really hard to push on the conference sort of side, but on the higher level sort of the upper level sort of stuff, we definitely can. But again, this when there's more technical stuff, I feel like I have to kind of lead the way through the technical sort of stuff.
I'll follow on to the whole conference thing. How do you keep one very talkative person from dominating it and get the shy ones to actually
Are you talking about me?
No, I'm talking about me, but yes.
Great question. This is the perennial challenge. Yeah, Kara, no. The way I just address it in the classroom, we have a conversation about it. We'll usually make some classroom guidelines as a group at the beginning of the semester. So I'll solicit from the whole group, you know, what makes a good conversation? What makes a good class? You've all been in classes before. What are some of the things that you notice? What works? What doesn't work? They all know. They all know that. They've all experienced it. They've all been it. Many of them know that they're it. Maybe they don't. But we just address it. We talk about it. We talk about ways to how to deal with that in the classroom. What if you are somebody who isn't going to be talking all the time? Who you maybe you're going to think about something a little bit more before you want to share it. We talk about how you might address that, and also being brave, right? And like, so that's a challenge for you, or that's something, you know, you just think differently. Great. And what if you try it this? And then we check in on those partway through the semester. We go back to those guidelines we made, and we say, like, how are we doing on these? Okay, what do we need to adjust? Yeah.
often the talkative people know. And so self-assessment, good relationship, all those things can go a long way in sort of early on kind of identifying, okay, that's something you're working on and how can I help and how can we help? A good strategy can be to kind of recruit a talkative student to help quieter students, right? So you can sort of say, wow, you have so many great ideas and you have a lot to say. How can you help me make sure that everyone in the class has the opportunity to speak? And that I found that works really well. But I would just flip it to the other side too, which is this idea that I've been reflecting on this a lot, that I'm not sure that my goal should be for every student to always talk all the time during a conference, and certainly that is a mode of engaging with the material that's great, and it's something we go for in this conference method. But in the last few years, I've been thinking a lot more about how to incorporate different ways of contributing and not making it an assumption that if you're not talking all the time in conference, that's a problem, because there are students that have ways to contribute that are different. And so it is a balance, and every group is different. It comes together at the beginning, and you sort of figure out, okay, I've got some talkers here. You can create groups maybe where you've got the talkative student paired with a few quieter students, and actually request that when someone speaks in class, they're actually bringing in something from their small group conversation that someone else said. So for example, like that would be a nice way to amplify the voice of a student who maybe would feel nervous to talk in the bigger group, something like that. But yeah, those dynamics are always interesting to work on.
So one of my jobs is to watch the clock, because you have a very busy schedule. Okay. Perfect. Well done. So we've got time for one more.
So Reed's known for being a very academically intense environment, and I think probably a lot of our kids are pretty ambitious, and if you say this is a 5-hour assignment, they'll take 8 hours. If you give them the optional reading, they'll consume all of it. So how do you help them maintain that work-life balance and work efficiently, but work meaningfully and not get burned out? Thanks.
I think a great way that we can do it is by modeling it ourselves. And I think it's a challenge, and that is a challenge for students at Reed. So I do think we've had a culture shift around that, or maybe we're in the middle of a culture shift around that. Yeah, I'll just speak for myself. I try to model it. I try to talk about it. I try to talk about the challenges of that kind of balance in life. And that's one of the reasons why, as I've already mentioned, I want students to come in and share, what are they coming in, like, who are you? Like, you're bringing a whole self into this room, right? You're not just the things that you read or the stuff that you wrote. And so I guess, yeah, I try to model it. I try to encourage us to talk about, like, what are some ways that you found joy this week? Tell me, that's our check-in question. Yeah.
One thing that I'm going to do this semester, which I haven't done previously, is to say in my syllabus and also in the classroom at the beginning that if you're spending more than 8 hours on this class, then come see me, right? So you shouldn't be spending more than 8 hours doing the readings. And if you are, then, of course, you have your other classes. So come to office hours. We'll talk about a plan, right, where you are able to use that time more efficiently, right? Either learn how to do closer reading and faster reading or some other techniques.
I would say the other thing, at least in my classes, it's before class starts is another place where I try to model that sort of thing. That, like, hey, what did you do this weekend? Hey, what do you got plans for the weekend? And when they tell me it's all the library, I said, no, I don't want to hear that. What else do you have? And then eventually we'll get there. So it's kind of making sure you have those conversations and bring them into the space a little bit too, so that they know. So with that, we are officially 1:45. You're on to whatever's next on the schedule. Thank you so much.